Testing 1, 2. All right, guys. Let's try this. Sorry for all the issues with the stream for you at home and all the delays. Hopefully we'll sort everything out. So, next up, Maxime from Silverstripe to tell us a bit more about CMS5. Thank you.
Cool. Obviously, my team decided to go to. My screen sort of came up. How do I get rid of this now? Cool. Yay! Okay, it's working. Cool. Cool. Okay, cool. So first, I'd like to thank Herbert and the Stripecon team for inviting me to speak to you this year, and all the hard work they've put in the background to make all of this possible. I had a blast talking to Stripecon, to virtual Stripecon last year, and it's an absolute delight to be able to join you in person this time. And hopefully, my cat will not be interrupting my presentation this year. So today, I'll be talking about the future of Silverstripe CMS and what it will look like. Obviously, we'll be talking about Silverstripe CMS 5, but I also want to cast our eye a little bit further afield. So basically, I want to give you a bit of an insider's view of where we see Silverstripe CMS today, how we think we got here, and where we see it going not only next year, but in years to come. Before we get into all those juicy details, it's probably worthwhile explaining who I am, what I'm doing here today, and why you should give a damn what I have to say. So I grew up in Gatineau, Canada, which I spent the first 25 years pretty close to home. I went to my local university there. I got a bachelor in computer science and then a master in project management from the Université du Québec en Outaouais. At which points I decided I needed to go and have an overseas experience before settling down. So all my uni friends came to see you folks here in Europe. So being a natural contrarian, I decided I needed to go the other way. And so in 2011, I took my first airplane trip ever and landed in New Zealand. I worked for the University of Otago in Dunedin for a few years. I got my residency in New Zealand. And then I became lead developer at Firebrand in Dunedin in 2014. So Firebrand is a boutique digital marketing agency with around a dozen staff. And at the time, they had about 100 websites that they were looking after for clients of various sizes. And this is where I encountered Silverstripe CMS for the very first time. So initially, I was like, what is this weird New Zealand software thing that I've never heard of? And eventually, I discovered that I could just trawl GitHub and then find a bunch of cool modules that I could install and solve my own problems by using them. And then eventually I realized I could actually create my own Silverstripe CMS modules and post them on GitHub, and other people can install them and solve their problems. My very first open source module was called Firebrand HQ Silverstripe-XL-Export. So that was a Silverstripe CMS3 module. You can still install it today if you want. And it added a special grid fill button you can use to swap the regular export button. And when you clicked on it, you'd get the option to get a legacy XL export or XL 2008 export, or you could do a CSV export as well. So that was all very exciting to me. And eventually, in 2016, I moved to Auckland, which is the biggest city in New Zealand. I jumped through a few jobs there. I kept making small open source contributions here and there. And eventually, I kept making those open source contributions in between my sort of regular work. But I kept coming back to Silverstripe CMS over and over again. And then finally, in 2018, I joined Silverstripe. So I saw that Silverstripe was advertising a product developer role. So this was a really awesome role for me because it was an opportunity to work on open source software full time and actually be paid for it. And I've been working on Silverstripe CMS ever since. And there's a few things you can alternatively thank me or blame me for. So I did most of the upgrade docs for CMS3. I spent a lot of time screaming at the upgrader tool in the process. I implemented the grid field model admin React Search UI. I refactored the asset system in CMS 4.4 so you could have a permanent link to a file that wouldn't change every time you updated and you uploaded a new version of the file. I updated the file section models. You could update the files after you uploaded them. And last year I did my first Stripecon talk about how the Silver Stripe CMS UI is put together. And finally, at the end of 2021, my Dan boss, Bryn, left Silver Stripe. And so at the start of 2022, I got promoted to be the CMS Squad team lead. I would like to think it was in recognition of my outstanding contributions to open source at Silver Stripe. Some cynics might say that it was because I was more or less the last person standing at the time and everybody else had resigned. But that's obviously nonsense, and how dare you suggest such a thing. Cool. So that's my little life story for you folks. In short, by the time I got involved with Silver Stripe CMS, the product was well established and a lot of developers had preceded me. So here are some of these developers. So Silver Stripe CMS was built on the passion, hard work, and of a lot of people. So all the people that you see on screen right now have made, at one point or another, a substantive contribution to Silver Stripe CMS. And I'm actually leaving an awful lot of people out. There's over 450 different contributors just to Silver Stripe framework. And honestly, I don't know who most of them are. For me, like very often I look at them, they're just a GitHub handle that occasionally pops up, and I'm not really sure where they are, why they're doing this, or where they come from. Some of them work on Silver Stripe CMS long ago and have since moved on to other things. Others are just getting started. Some of them are like me and get to do this for a living. Others just do it on their spare time because they find it interesting or because they care. While we value all the developers who contribute to Silver Stripe CMS over the years, it's worth pointing out that there's a small group of them that really went above and beyond. So Sam started an entire company and then decided to open source its main asset. Ingo and Aaron both moved across the world to work on a product that they love. So Ingo literally wrote the book on Silver Stripe CMS. And Aaron spent years in community helping others and building cool add-ons before actually joining the open source team at Silver Stripe. If it weren't for the three of them, Silver Stripe CMS as it exists today might very well not exist. And when you're starting a new business or developing a new product, you need people like Ingo, Aaron, or Sam. You need people that are passionate, smart, dedicated, and frankly a little bit crazy. Between the three of them, Ingo and Sam have pretty much occupied every possible role you could do at a tech company, like from CEO to CTO to solution architect to business analyst to chief information security officer to community manager to partner manager, product manager, data scientist, R&D, development lead, technical writer. They've all, like formally and informally, they've all played all these roles and many more. And when operating with a startup mindset, you need people who can wear multiple hats and can step up to solve new emerging challenges as they come up. But after a while, it's not sustainable to build a product or a company around a handful of highly passionate individuals. Because no matter how dedicated they might be, eventually they'll decide that they want to do something else or they want to have new challenges somewhere else. And over the last 2 years, sadly, we've lost all three of them. So these days, Sam is CTO at a property management software startup called Frankie. Meanwhile, Aaron and Ingo are busy revolutionizing project management at Run. So fortunately, you can still find all three of them lurking in the Silver Stripe Slack or the Silver Stripe forum, dispensing infinite wisdom to everyone. And as gutting as it might have been to see Sam and Aaron and Ingo move on to other things, we have sort of accept that Silver Stripe is not a startup anymore. We can't depend on a handful of people to carry us forward all the time. We've been in business for over 20 years now. We employ close to 100 staff, and we're hiring new ones every day. And thousands of organizations rely on Silver Stripe CMS to deliver content and functionality to millions of internet users. So this includes sites like the New York City Ballet, developed by Main Media. or this is the shout-out part to all our wonderful partners of the talk, or the government of Slovenia's website that was developed by Innovative, or newzealand.com, which we developed for Tourism New Zealand and serve as the first point of entry for millions of tourists looking to visit New Zealand each year. And when those tourists decide to book an airplane ticket, they might do so on the Air New Zealand website, which also uses Surfstripe CMS. So multi-million-dollar businesses are built around Surfstripe CMS. They made a significant investments in our product, and they expect us to be there today, tomorrow, next year, and next decade. So we need to be in a position to guarantee to the community that the commitment that they've made to Surfstripe CMS is wise and will keep paying off in the future. And we need to have a right process, but most importantly, the right people in place to do that. This means that Surfstripe, the company, and Surfstripe, the CMS, have to grow up, because our decisions and our mistakes impact not only ourselves, but all of you guys. So since the last Stripecon, Wayne and a lot of other people at Surfstripe have been busy behind the scenes putting in place the structures that will enable Surfstripe CMS to stay competitive and set the foundation for the next phase of its evolution. So a big part of making sure that Surfstripe CMS stays competitive is having actual developers working on the thing on a daily basis. So you'll be happy to know that I'm not the last CMS developer standing anymore. Should I be stricken down, others will rise to avenge me. Or they might do a little dance on my grave. I'm not sure. I can be a grumpy boss sometimes. So this is the CMS squad. Starting from the left there, you have Guy Sartorelli, who joined the squad a couple months ago. You have me, my longtime partner in crime, Steve Boyd, who's been on the squad for around 3 years now. And Sabina Talipova, who transferred from one of our bespoke teams a few months ago. So all 4 of us are working on Surfstripe CMS pretty much full-time. And we're the team most directly responsible for looking after Surfstripe CMS. So we're the one patching the security issues, tagging releases, and obsessing about obscure little details that most of you will hopefully never notice. And historically, the open source developers at Surfstripe have done a lot more than just look after the actual code of the product. So we did things like quality assurance, or drafting documentations, doing user research, reviewing what competing CMSs are doing. We plan product roadmaps, define security process, support our bespoke teams, support a community, among many other things. And what we've realized over time is that we're just across too many concerns, and we've being pulled in too many different directions. And the sort of consequence of that is that it's taking away time for us from looking after the actual product and actual code base. So one important innovation that has occurred since over the last year is that Surfstripe has formalized a lot of roles that used to be done directly or indirectly by Ingo, Aaron, or Sam. So the CMS squad doesn't operate in a vacuum. We have an awesome crew of colleagues that support us in various ways. So first off, we have Catherine Koch, more commonly known inside the company as CK. So her job is Information Security Manager. So she helps us manage our security processes, and she kicks us in the butt to make sure we don't slack off on security. Next, we have Ashley Muller. She is in charge of service design. So she helps Surfstripe think of the full life cycle of the services we develop and sell. So in the past, we spent a lot of time and energy building things and being only all focused on the sort of narrow technical aspect of the solution. But there's a lot more consideration, like, are we going to convince potential clients to use this service? Or are we going to onboard them? How much should we charge them for this bloody thing? That's where Ashley comes in. She helps us sort like all those peripheral questions that gets in the way of us actually doing the sort of boring technical details. And then we have Noel Griffin, our partner manager. So Noel looks after you folks. And so he's in charge of he's a channel between Surfstripe and his partners. So he can go in and like let you know what we in the CMS squad and the rest of Surfstripe is up to. And he can also collect your feedback and all the information that you need, and then can feed that back into the product. And then you've already met Jackson Darlow, our new technical director. So Surfstripe is a a complicated company with lots of moving parts. So Jackson helps all the different parts get aligned and pull in generally the same direction, most of the time, hopefully. Next, we have Stefan Macrogiani, but no one calls him that. Everyone calls him Smack, because that's way more badass. So Smack is our solution director. He supports our bespoke team in designing innovative solutions for our clients. However, a lot of the insight that comes out of those projects is then fed back to the CMS squad, and that helps us create better solutions for everybody else in the community. Andrew Paxley is our platform engineer. Oh, here we go. We're back. Okay, yeah, so we have Andrew Paxley. He's our platform engineering team lead. So he and his team, his primary job is to look after Silverstripe Cloud. So they work very closely with Silverstripe, with the CMS squad to make sure that Silverstripe CMS runs smoothly on our Silverstripe Cloud hosting solution. But more generally, they provide a lot of insight about how we can make Silverstripe CMS run across the whole range of architectures, not only the ones we're actually using. And finally, we have, last but not least, we have Eva Oschwaltz. She is our ICT project manager. So Eva has the unenviable task of trying to keep everybody else on track, on schedule, and on budget. And she always does it with a smile, and she never gets grumpy. Or if she does get grumpy, she does it in German, so I don't understand it anyway. So I just went through these 7 people because they are the people that the CMS squad works most directly with on a day-to-day basis. But really, I could have listed the entire company there because everyone at Silverstripe helps us push the product forward in one way or another. And we're not done yet. As I mentioned, we're hiring new people every day. So we have several roles coming up in the not-too-distant future that will help support the CMS squad and the community. So we're currently looking at hiring a few solution architects to help us design better solution for Silverstripe CMS. We're also looking at hiring a marketing director that will help us have a more dedicated marketing strategy and help us and help you sell Silverstripe CMS to more customers. One role I'm super stoked about is our product manager position. So the product manager will be focused more on guiding the future direction of Silverstripe CMS and Silverstripe Cloud. They will spend time looking at what other CMSs are doing and help us better focus our resources. And their primary job will be to define a more purposeful roadmap for Silverstripe CMS and Silverstripe Cloud. But most importantly, the product manager will have the ignominious task of being my boss. God have mercy on their soul. Okay. So while most of the commits might be coming from these 4 CMS squad members, we are surrounded by people that helps us create more value for the Silverstripe CMS community, and we're actively looking at adding some more. Because at the end of the day, all a CMS developer wants is to feel loved and supported and the occasional shoulder to cry on. So on this fuzzy note, let's move on to our next topic. So I've already mentioned that we're looking at rebuilding our marketing capabilities by hiring a marketing director. But in the short term, we have an immediate problem that Silverstripe.org kind of sucks right now. So there hasn't been a major refresh in several years, and a lot of the content is outdated. I can still regularly find CMS3 examples in our doc every day. And there's a lot of broken features, or occasionally I will even discover features that I didn't know existed in the site. And having spent literally years screaming at people to upgrade to CMS4 already, to migration, the site is still running CMS3. But the good news is that we're rebuilding Silverstripe.org, so we'll be starting completely from scratch. And we don't have an exact time frame for when this will actually be shipped to in production, but we've had our first discovery around 3 weeks ago. And we're still in the gathering requirements phase, but watch this space for the next few months. And the key thing to know is we need your input. So a primary goal of the site will be to support people like you who have to stand in front of potential clients and try to convince them to use Silverstripe CMS. So if you're passionate about Silverstripe CMS, and if you're not, what are you doing at Stripecon? What we want to hear from you guys. So just email community@silverstripe.org with the subject line .org redesign, and add a little blurb about yourself. And Noel over there or Beth will be in touch with you to get some feedback and maybe invite you to some workshops and so on. Now finally, I've kept the best part for last, so I'll be talking about our new major release policy, aka Silverstripe CMS 5. Okay, so 5 years ago we released Silverstripe CMS 4.0. A lot of the CMS 3 to 4 upgrades were, shall we say, less than a delightful experience. So in 2019, Sam Minet came to Stripecon and said that we wouldn't be releasing CMS 5 for the foreseeable future. So the idea at the time was to allow projects to upgrade to CMS 4 without having an eventual CMS 5 upgrade hanging over their heads. So since then, we've been trying our best to keep Silverstripe CMS 4 up to date and running and minimizing upgrade woes for Silverstripe CMS projects. However, over the years, we found that we're spending more and more time just working on dependency upgrades. So in 2021, upgrading dependency was pretty much the only thing we were doing. And by we here, I mean Steve. And we have to make, and what we found is that we had to make more and more compromises to try to keep all our dependencies up to date. And then we found that in many cases, we had to ban our semantic versioning commitments, if not outright break them, to be able to upgrade those dependencies. And in practice, what this has meant is that we've had to occasionally rely on end-of-life dependencies, or we had to and we were not able to promptly add support for the latest PHP releases as they were made available. So for example, to add support to PHP 8 in CMS 4.10, we had to add some weird hack so that we could have like dual support for PHP Unit 5.7 and PHP Unit 9.5. And then like, depending on what version you had installed, we would like do some dynamic detection to say, okay, well, we're going to load this version of Sapphire test instead of this other version. And even then, it took us a full year to add PHP 8 support. And like, if you wanted to actually have your project run in PHP 8, you had to sort of rewrite a bunch of your unit tests to be able to get them compatible with PHP Unit 9.5. So we had pushed back CMS 5 indefinitely, hoping to provide long-term certainty for Silverstripe CMS projects. But we got to a point where that approach was actually creating more uncertainty because project owners couldn't know like if a minor release would be having shipping with breaking changes, or they couldn't plan for like when we would be able to support the newest PHP version. So while we still think that the architecture in Silverstripe CMS 5 is fundamentally sound, we need to be able to make some breaking changes here and there to upgrade dependencies and pay down some of that technical debt we've accumulated over the years. So we want our major release policy to be incremental, iterative, and predictable. CMS 3 and CMS 4 were like fundamentally two different products. Basically, we needed to rip the guts out of CMS 3 and put it back together to have a good architectural foundation for CMS 4. But the good news is that the underlying architecture of CMS 4 is still pretty solid, so we're not looking at making any big sweeping changes. So our major release will be focused on 3 key aspects. So first, we want to be in a position to upgrade all our dependencies. So we found that the sort of key obstacle to adding support for the latest PHP version was being able to sort of, every time like a new PHP version came out, all the other dependencies we were depending on would sort of do their own major release to add support for it. And then we had to choose between like upgrading those dependencies to the latest major or like holding them back so we could support like avoid breaking our APIs. Our thinking is that every 2 years we give ourselves permissions to bump all our dependencies to latest version. This means that for the life cycle of any given major release, we wouldn't need to sort of spend an awful lot of time upgrading dependencies because everything will be running a reasonably recent and supported version. Next, we want to pay down our technical debt. So over the years, we've made some mistakes, we made some compromises. And if you take any of them in isolation, they're not super complicated, but if you aggregate them all together, you find that we're carrying a lot of extra complexity with us. And that leads to a situation where we're being slowed down because that's adding a lot of overhead to our work. Finally, we do have to make some occasional substantial architectural change that simply cannot be done without breaking APIs. In practice, we don't expect to see many of those, but like over time, and with each major release, we'll probably have a few tweaks here and there where we're like refactoring things or like rethinking some of our broader APIs. While all those changes will lead to some API breakages, they are not the kind of breaking changes that would require us to completely re-engineer Silverstripe CMS. So it will be a lot easier for us to provide Silverstripe CMS projects with a clear upgrade path going forward. One thing to mention is we don't expect to be shipping a lot of new features in major releases. New features will normally be shipped in minor releases or in optional modules that you can choose to install on your project. Major releases are really about removing and cleaning things up, and not so much about adding new things in the code base. So last month, we formally adopted our major release policy after a period of consultation. So we've decided to adopt a 2-year major release cycle. So basically, we'll be releasing new majors every 2 years. And a major release line will be in active development for 2 years. So during those 2 years, after we release a major, we'll be shipping new features via minor releases. We'll be doing all the regular things like security fixes, bug fixes, and so on. And after those 2 years, the major will enter a bug and security fix phase, so for 1 year. So that means that during that year, we'll be shipping patches at all impact levels, but we won't be adding any new features or any new APIs. Then we'll have one final year of high-impact security fixes. So in that final year, we'll be fixing security issues that have a CVSS score of 7 or above. So that's what we used to call limited support, essentially. So in practice, what this means is that once we release CMS 5, you'll have 2 years, you'll have 2 full years to upgrade your project to CMS 5 before CMS 4 is end of life. This also means that you'll be able to plan you'll be able to know well in advance when CMS 6 or CMS 7 will be released, because we're going to follow a regular cadence going forward. Just to illustrate what this will look like in practice, we've got this timeline here. So what happened, just to, so in effect, we'll be releasing CMS 5 around April of 2023. From there, you'll have 2 years to upgrade to CMS 4 before it goes end of life. In 2025, we'll be releasing CMS 6, and then again, you'll have another 2 years to upgrade to that. And in 27, we'll be releasing CMS 7, and so on. Honestly, CMS 5 will be kind of dull and boring. We're hoping to ship the first beta of CMS 5 in early 2023, and to tag the stable release in April of that year. So this, in practice, doesn't give us an awful lot of time to make big, sweeping changes. The plus side for you folks is that, since we won't have an awful lot of time to break things, your upgrade should minimize the amount of work you have to do to upgrade. And at launch, CMS 5 will support PHP 8.1 and PHP 8.2. And when an eventual PHP 8.3 is released in November 2023, we will aim to add support for that version in the minor release. Most of the changes will be around upgrading all our dependencies. So we really want to have a clean slate so that we can build on top of that. So some of those dependencies might open some new possibilities and new features, but that's very much a secondary concern. Our main concern is to have something like that will be able to be supported for the entire life cycle of CMS 5. We'll also try our best to pay down some of the technical debt we've accumulated over the years. So for example, that sort of horrible PHP unit dual support act that we've implemented in 4.10 will be removed. And we'll also try to find other compromises that we've added over the years to sort of remove those and just have it start from a nice, good starting point to build on top of going forward. So we don't expect much in terms of big architectural changes. The reality is that most of the next few months will be focused on delivering the small breaking changes that we absolutely need to ship. And once all of that is done, we'll probably look around and see if there's like some nice high-value, low-risk architectural change we can sneak into CMS 5. If you're looking to start playing with CMS5 today, you can do it. So we've the CMS Squad, while I was busy gallivanting here in Stockholm, they've released the first alpha 2 days ago. So you can so you can go out and install it right now if you want with that little composer command there. And if you're feeling like living a bit more dangerously, you can install our development branches with the second command down there. So if you're looking to actually do, if you're looking at doing like PRs or like trying to do fix bugs or like get things merged into the CMS5 codebase, you'll probably want to run with that second one there. Beware that this is like really much something that's a work in progress. So like we're in the process of upgrading all the dependencies. So if you're so there's a good chance that like if you try to run that second command, it might not be able to install stuff because like there's conflicts that we're in the process of solving. And if you want to keep up with what the CMS Squad is up to, we're publishing every 2 weeks. We're publishing sprint announcements on the Silverstripe forum under this tag. So you can just keep an eye out to get some updates about what we're working on CMS5 or some of the ongoing work we're doing on CMS4. And speaking of CMS4, it's not dead yet. So the CMS Squad has made several incremental updates. So the 4.12 release will have several quality of life improvements, like providing better default for model admin and grid field admin search, and better navigation between grid field views. We're currently expecting to ship a 4.12 release in December of this year, and we'll probably also ship a 4.13 release sometime before CMS5 is out. So 4.13 would probably be like a bridging minor, where basically you would be able to upgrade your project to that. That would make it easy for you to then upgrade to CMS5. And one important thing to note is we will not be adding PHP 8.2 support to CMS4. So if you want to be running PHP 8.2, you will have to upgrade to CMS5. And so yeah, and once, as I mentioned, once CMS5 is released, we'll no longer be adding new features to CMS4. And from there, you'll have 2 years to upgrade from 4 to 5 before 4 goes end of life. So my message to you today and to your client is that if you're looking at starting a new project tomorrow, CMS4 is still an absolutely fine option. So don't roll your thumbs for the next like 6 months waiting for CMS5. You can build your project on CMS4 today, and then when CMS5 comes around, you'll have a clear upgrade path to get that project from 4 to 5. So to close, we'll cast our eye a bit beyond CMS5 for a bit. So we're working on our major release. So working on our major policies, major release policy was kind of weird for me. Until then, I was really used to be working on a month-by-month basis, and then suddenly I found myself thinking, like, what will I do? When will I release CMS 8 next decade? And every time I was writing a date, I was getting confused because I was forgetting if we were in 2022 or 2023 or 2024. So it was a really weird feeling for me. So CMS 5 will rarely be a transitional release. So it's going to be that awkward point where we go from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. And basically, it will give us a chance to address like all the big screaming concerns that are holding us back on many and causing us to pull our hair, but not an awful lot more than that. So CMS 6 will probably be like the point where we really feel the full impact of our major release policy. Because by the time CMS 6 comes along, we'll have enough lead time to actually think about what we want to do and have like slightly more ambitious expectations. In many ways, the biggest impact of our new major release policy will be felt in between major releases when we release minor releases. So the regular cadence there will not only facilitate your project upgrades, it will also make it easier for us to deliver improvements via minor releases. The CMS Squad will have, since the CMS Squad will have to spend less time upgrading dependencies in between minors, we'll be able to focus more time on actually delivering features and high-impact bug fixes in minor releases. And this also will de-risk a lot of like development we're doing. So every time we add a new feature or a new API, we always have in the back of our mind, I'm going to support this to like infinity, and I don't know when I'll have a chance to fix it if I screw it up. So at least now we'll have like a 2-year window where we say, okay, well, if I screw this up, in 2 years I'll be able to fix it. might not sound like a big deal for a lot of people, but like for us, it's really a big improvement because it's very liberating. Because like it will hopefully give us more chance to experiment and move a bit faster at some points. So my draft note for the slide said, "Insert uplifting poetic conclusion here." I just want to go back to this slide quickly. As I go throughout my days screaming at my unit test or complaining about Entwine or pulling my hair because I have composer conflicts, it's easy to lose sight of the hundreds of people who have spent thousands of hours delivering, contributing to Silverstripe CMS. Or all the developers and digital agencies who have built businesses and careers around our product. Or the millions of users who unknowingly rely on Silverstripe CMS every day. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have the chance to make a living working on open source software. And I'm eternally grateful for people like you who put your trust in our product and in our company. And every day we try our best to earn that trust. So thank you for being active members of the Silverstripe CMS community and for listening to my talk today.
All right, thank you very much. Really informative. So I'll bring up the panel again, see what's in store for you now. Great, so if you have any questions, raise your hand, write on the app. Stacy, do you have any questions so far? Or do you have any questions maybe?
Oh.
I'll leave it to you.
Before we go and see if there's questions from the audience, the technical debt thing triggered me, obviously. We want to know more what you're cleaning up, like the whole React Entwine thing in the back end, and what kind of things are you hoping to fix?
Like as much as I'd like to sort of kill Entwine and move on to other things, I think that's just a little bit too much of like, that would like literally take us a couple of months, and like it would probably make an upgrade process pretty painful. One thing we're looking forward to is trying to at least upgrade our like JavaScript stack. Like right now, we're running we're like 3 or 4 versions of Webpack behind, which is like really painful. And so like if we can have at least a clean slate starting there, that will like set us, make our sort of development process a bit easier for going forward. Not to rehearse my talk from last year, but like we've got a really weird setup where basically like you have to sort of be able to take all the sort of JavaScript client libraries we've got and split them up in various PHP packages and then bring them all back into one UI. I know talking to Uncle Cheese over the years, it's like the little pipe dream was to be able to have some sort of JavaScript build step somewhere there. That might be something we'll look at CMS 6. That's not something we'll have a chance to look at in CMS 5. But really, like the technical debt is like really boring stuff. It's like we've got like, well, some of you might remember that at launch CMS 4 wasn't able to have like a page called resource because like all the sort of client JavaScript and images that your modules are shipping are going under a resource folder under your public directory. Eventually, we made a hack in there so that you could choose a different name for that. So like by default, it still goes to resource, but then if you add a little magic config file to your composer file, it goes to _resource, and then you can use the resource URL segment for your pages. So that's the kind of thing we'll be removing. And there's a lot of like little, like I said, a lot of our work is like boring details that hopefully go unnoticed for everybody else. Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? Questions from the audience? Werner, Johannes?
Of course
Of course you do.
Switching to 2-year major release cycles, are you worried about just finishing stuff to get a release out? I mean, like, this is something big software companies had huge problems with, like Microsoft or whatever, with fixed release dates and just pumping stuff in there just to meet a release date that's not finished. Is this something you're worried about?
We'll probably be working with the assumption, like, basically we'll have a backlog, and then like, whenever, and then we'll have a list of things that we absolutely want to ship in there. And obviously that will be like at the top of our list. Like right now, the sort of thing that are at the top of our list is upgrade all the dependencies. And then we'll have like, that's currently what I'm working on right now, is just like I have to have a sort of list of like optional features or like optional improvements we want to make. And then like we'll probably have some date somewhere around like the end of December or early January where it says like if it's not done by this date, it doesn't get in, and we'll have to wait until CMS 6 or something like that.
And you're willing to wait 2 years then to release something again?
Like we're very much Silverstripe has very much an agile approach. So basically like there's nothing like we're kind of happy with where Silverstripe CMS is right now, and it's always that tension between like fixing things and like addressing like sort of technical debt or dependency upgrades and like adding new features. So like we'll probably be operating in that sort of weird time flow where like, okay, we'll get CMS 5 out the door, we'll start working on adding new features, and somewhere in there we'll have in the back of our minds, okay, what do we want to do in CMS 6? And then like at somewhere around the end of like, at 1 year after CMS 5 is released, we'll probably start thinking, okay, what do we want to put in CMS 6? And like I said, like we're kind of happy with where the architecture of CMS 4 is, and we don't like look around and say like we absolutely need to break this thing to get this super cool feature in, because like most of the features we might want to implement like could be done in CMS 4 if we had enough time and enough like we were able to sort of work around all the limitations. So like I said, like major releases are boring. they're not meant to be like super radical changes. Essentially, it's just like clean things up, make sure things are a good setup for building upon. So like it's going to be that sort of content spool. It's going to be like that constant back and forth of like adding more stuff in, adding more complexity in, and then simplifying things and so on.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any questions from the audience? Curious about CMS 5? Werner? No questions right now?
No, really not.
I think we're doing really well on time.
I think we're doing good, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want, I can answer some of the questions that Jackson and Wayne dance around.
Okay. Oh.
Yes. So I think one of the questions was around roadmap. So as I mentioned, the product manager role will be like their job. So like Wayne and Jackson really operate with pie in the sky ideas, and then the sort of my team is like kind of down to earth, like this button's broken, we need to fix it. And me and the product manager will be somewhere in between in the sort of more tactical space. So we'll probably not be in a point where like basically we can we'll like have a nice little like flow chart that says we'll be implementing this wonderful feature in this date on this year. But hopefully we'll be able to get in a point where like you can at least like have a better idea, like they're working on this right now. And I think that's where like we started doing those sprint announcements every 2 weeks, just so that you can like, hopefully like as we sort of go along, someone will be able to look back and say, okay, well, what did the last 5 sprint announcements say? That's what they've been working on, so that's what will be in the next release. Yeah.
Oh, and one more question. Like some of the core, or some of the very popular, I should say, modules like Fluent and Elemental, how does Silverstripe look at keeping that up to date, and how is the CMS group looking at that?
Yeah, like very often, if you look at Fluent particularly, a lot of the work we do is actually driven by like what we need for our own clients. Like a lot of work that went into Fluent is actually in there for Tourism New Zealand, and we'll have a talk about Moimir, I think later today or tomorrow, about specifically Fluent. So like, I think like we've literally released like 2 major, like Moimir and friends have released like 2 major releases of Fluent over the last couple years. And I think that's like, a lot of that were like, CMS Squad had like very little to do with that. And like that was all like changes that they needed because Tourism New Zealand had some problems and they needed to get them fixed. And I think if you look at a lot of, like Tourism New Zealand is actually an awesome client for us because they're like, very often the clients are only focused on like the front end, like delivering content to actual users, but because Tourism New Zealand has such a complex use case where they have like content auditors across the world managing different languages and having to translate content across like all sorts of wide ranging of markets, they actually like, they have like a real incentive in terms of like pushing us to get the CMS better. Yeah, in terms of Elemental, we're managing it as like a supported module. I think Elemental is interesting because like very often, one thing we've realized over the years is like there's a lot of like things we try to build purposefully, like campaign admin, and like when I sort of joined Silverstripe, like we just released CMS 4, and like campaign admin was this sort of new section. And like the biggest question, like two biggest question we got was like, what does campaign admin do, and how do I get rid of it? And like, this is like kind of an example where like sometimes we have these pie in the sky idea, and we like spend lots of time thinking about how will this thing work, and then we end up spending a lot of time building modules that like literally no one uses. And a lot of the sort of cool features are actually coming from people like you. Like if you look at, say, our current asset admin section, it's really an offshoot of like Kick Asset. And Elemental was actually built by DNA Design, which is a completely different company that's like competes with us for like a lot of government contracts in New Zealand. And that's an example where like basically like if you sort of like, very often like we can spend a lot of time planning fancy things, but like very often the proof is in the pudding of like, does a client actually need this and is willing to pay to get it out the door? And I think very often what you'll find is like sort of most use module are like actually things that like someone builds because a client needs it, and then they iterate over it over time. And then eventually it becomes so ubiquitous that we don't have a choice to take it and put it back in our core modules, in our core product offering.
Are you considering that with any of these?
Uh,
when does it become core? When you know when is there a big enough use base, or when is it?
Yeah. There's an entire separate discussion right now in terms of like, currently there's like, we've got like 80 something supported modules right now. So we've got like, what's in the server Stripe installer is what we consider core modules, so that we consider like this is kind of part of the core experience. So that's like things like frameworks, CMS, site config, assets, asset admin. So and then there's like those sort of what we call supported modules. That's things like Elemental or Fluent or version admin, or like all these other things that we don't officially we officially support them, and we sort of like every time we do a release, we'll do like a full regression suite on them just to make sure that they still work. But at the same time, like we don't consider them to be core of the experience. So those are things that you install optionally because you have a use case for them. And we're sort of trying to like 80 modules is just too much. Some of them are like, I think to be honest, like a lot of them, like they're supported because they were required for the CFP contract. And that's sort of like out the window, and we'd like to sort of be able to, we'd like to be a bit more selective in what we're supporting. So in the fine print of the release policy, if you go read it, you'll have a place in there that says we will review supported modules every time we do a major release. In the short term, we're probably not looking at removing an awful lot of things because, quite frankly, we don't have the time to sort of like go out and like figure out what's the most use. That's one thing we're sort of trying to figure out internally, is like have a better process for determining this should be a supported module and this shouldn't. And like maybe I have clearer commitments in terms of like basically like if this module is necessary, like this module is used by a lot of people, brings in a lot of revenue for us or partners, then okay, we have to support it. And then this thing, so yeah, so like it's still a space to watch. We'll probably like drop a couple of things that are like completely useless. Like I think there's like a module called Phototico or something like that technically we support. I'm not even sure what it does, but like it's there and it's on our list of supported modules. So that's one of the ones that we'll definitely drop in CMS 5. I don't hear anybody screaming right now, so that's good news for me.
Will you have sunset periods for supported modules that you don't want to support any
So
longer?
what we'll probably, we're not 100% sure I will do this long term, but like what we might do is like if there's a module that like we're thinking about dropping support for, we might just say upgrade it so that it works with CMS 5. But then like after CMS 5 is out, we say we don't support it anymore. So if somebody wants to pick it up or wants to keep looking after it, you can pick it up. But like in practice, like we're still figuring out the fine print of that. So.
Yeah, just for the community, it'd be nice to have like a heads up, like if you say we ported it, but this is it, that we know it might not be a good idea to start a new project or not, or something.
Yeah, once we have like a more defined list of what we want to drop, we'll publish it for everybody to notice. Yeah, so we're not quite ready. Like I know I'm having lots of air pulling with Jackson and some bespoke teams because like it's kind of weird because like there's some modules that like a lot of our internal project use that like technically under the Silverstride name and technically we own that we don't support. And then there's like modules that nobody uses. Like we got a CKN registry module that literally no one's installed, but like we support this because somebody made a call at some stage that needed to be supported. So it's kind of like really a question of like better aligning our process. So like they'll like what we take with one end, what we give at one end, we sometimes take it back. So it'll probably be a case like where the modules that are really popular and that people are actually using, we'll try to support them more, and the ones that we don't actually support, we won't necessarily look after them as well. And like, a sort of dirty secret is like, there's a lot of modules we support, but like really we just make sure you can install them in the latest version. Maybe we'll do a quick regression test when we release the code at the end of it. But like in practice, we're not like actively looking at adding features to them. So like supported module, like that's an interesting concept in a sense that like if there's a security risk or if like there's a big like meteor that is the ground, we'll be there to hold the bag for you and make sure that things still work. But like that doesn't necessarily mean that like we're actively working on it like every day.
One more question if we got the time. Jack talked about scalability, and I mean during the microphone problems or whatever, we were saying scalability is something we currently don't see in the technical part of Silverstripe as one of the core strengths. Is this something you have on your roadmap? Is this something you can share ideas about what you're going to do regarding scalability, or is this something you say this is far off?
It's probably more on the far off side. Like in terms of building a site that scale, like very often the question is like there's a mix of architectural concerns of like, does your platform support it properly? And then there's like, have you coded your site properly so that say most of the things are cache? And then like when there's like 1 million users that wake up one morning and decide to connect to your site because like a new virus just appeared out of nowhere and then they want to know how they're going to live for the next couple of weeks. I mean, like very often it's like just a question of following best practices, being able to make sure your content is cache, and then like having sort of underlying architecture at the other end of it. And that's where we see things like Silverstripe Cloud being super useful because essentially we sort out a lot of those problems, like just like for things like auto scaling and so on. That's where we sort of like really sort of have that sort of enterprise hosting solution. That's a bit more useful for like really big projects. And then like at the other end of it, it's that conversation is really like just making sure that we give you the APIs and we give you the guidance for like having like better caching or better support or like being able to handle like multiple requests coming from various places in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have a question in the audience. If we can get a microphone from Thomas from No Brainer Web.
I'll do it.
Ah, there we go.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
I can't hear you. I'm not sure the people on the internet. But
Do we have sound on the microphone? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, basically I just want to ask a question. It's perhaps a bit in relation to the grid field extensions module. I think generally my question is, how do you decide what kind of improvements to make in the CMS? Because I feel that you actually, there are some lacking things in the CMS, like just something ease of life things. Like let's say we have a grid field, you want to have things like right-clicking options or ticking little boxes for each record and doing option or actions on each record. I feel in comparison to other CMSs that this is a part where Silverstripe is actually lacking features.
yeah, that's like been an ongoing problem for us. Is like basically creating a channel for the community to sort of create PRs and address their issues as they come along. Like, for example, like we have lots of like PRs that are sitting there because nobody has time to go and review them. And I think that's really like one thing we sort of need to look at and improving over the years is like basically like just like maybe find a process for like if there's active community members, how do we get to a point where we can say, okay, well, you've been doing a lot of work and like you know how this thing works pretty well. Maybe you can decide that this PR is a priority and it should be merged without having to come back to the CMS quad. On the side, there's also like a group called the core committers, which are like community members. A lot of them are like former Silverstripers that have just like went off to do other things, and they have the ability to merge things in there as well. Very often, sort of problems we've got is like, it's like anything, you don't want to be like merging every possible feature in core or like having like every possible trying to address like every possible need directly in the core product. So in the sense like, I think very often like sort of if like very often if you have like specific needs, you might be better off just like creating a sign module that can be installed and like complements the sort of core features that like don't come out into the box. Like our aim as a sort of product is really to sort of be able to sort of deliver the sort of 80% of needs that like basically every CMS site out there might need, and then make it easy for that like for you guys to sort of build the extra 20% of bespoke needs that like meet the needs of a specific client. So like for example, like things like grid field extension, like in a perfect world, like you would be able to just go out, create your own extension, maybe ship it in your own module, or like you wouldn't need to sort of ship it back into core, or like, or even better, like if it's something that's really critical to the experience, then maybe we'd sort of find a way to sort of prioritize them. Like really like that's where like really not having a product manager right now is a big concern for us, because basically we don't necessarily have all the bandwidth sort of managing all the competing things that people want us to do.
But yeah, I don't know if it's... Yeah,
Turn it on again?
Yeah. That's basically my question, is that I think doing something like campaign manager, I think that was quite interesting to say that. It's something that I don't know a lot of people that uses it. And what I'm talking about, maybe it's just an example, right? But this is some functionality that 90% of people would be using as CMS. So that's why I'm asking. I think asking people to do this in a module or add-on, I don't think that's the right way to go. I think you need that kind of functionality in the CMS. That's, you know, it's a basic feature that people would need when they use the CMS. So I actually think, in general, there's a good usability in Silverstripe CMS, but you lack features that you would get in another system. So, for instance, I can give you another example. That's the search, right? If you want to do a search now, people will click on search and they get one field. They'll need to click another button to realize that you can search for multiple fields. Yeah. So I heard that you are actually doing something about that. That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. But another thing is like in the relation editor field, you can search for a relation. It works really great. But you only have a title. I know you can customize the title, but that's not very visual, right? So if you're looking for something with an image, for instance, how would you know what to choose? So it's a lot of issues like that, small things.
Yeah, and like I said, like as we sort of like managed to sort of, like right now, like for like literally last year, like we were like, it was literally just me and Steve looking after all of that. So like it was basically, is it on fire, yes or no? Then like we're gonna fix it if it's on fire. But like, hopefully now that we've got Guy and Sabina, that one thing that's been super great about having them on board is that it creates more time. So like, while me and Steve are busy putting fires out, like Sabina and Guy have been spending lots of time, say, doing like minor improvements to grid fields. Like just on a specific example, you just mentioned, from the 4.12 release forward, you'll be able to sort of like, when you type a search in your sort of grid field search, it's just going to look at like all the terms all your columns that you got in your current grid field at that stage. Yeah, like as we sort of like have more space to sort of like do like non-critical bug fixes, hopefully that will sort of open some new possibilities for us to sort of prioritize other things. But again, we'll still like, that's where like we have to sort of be a bit more purposeful. Like we have to be able to sort of identify, okay, this is a critical need and it needs to be fixed, or like it's a high value feature that people are really wanting. And like right now we've got like a couple thousand issues sitting in our GitHub, and it's just like a big part of my role and a big part of product manager role is like being able to sort the noise from signal in there and being able to identify what's the next most important thing we should be working on. And I think honestly that's something we struggle over the years. Like it's really hard for us to sort of, like I said, we're being pulled in so many directions, we can't really, it's difficult for us to realize that this is an actual problem and this is not an actual problem. And one part of what Noel will be doing going forward is like he'll be able to be talking to our partners in the community on a sort of more regular basis. So like when you have specific issues that are really bugging you or bugging your clients, you'll be able to give it to Noel. Noel will sort of relay it back to me. So that's very often the sort of one thing that like the people inside Silverstripe, they can just come to me and talk to me directly. So when I screw something up, they don't have to wait to see me at Stripecon to tell me that like I'm doing a bad job. They can just tell it to me directly. So hopefully what Noel will be able to do is like be that sort of like indirect channel to sort of get things on my radar essentially.
I think we're good for time, right? We need to move on probably.
Go.
This one. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we need to move on with the lightning talks. And first up, I think we have James with some cool scripts, magic scripts, who knows?
Hopefully cool. We'll find out.
All right. Okay, you can. Oh, you mic'd up already. Oh, perfect.
Yep, all good to go, hopefully.
Thanks.
If I can find the cable. See which technical issues I end up experiencing. Bear with. Okay. How are we looking? Ah. Perfect. So, I'm James Cocker. I'm a freelance web developer from Edinburgh in Scotland. And today I wanted to give you a quick demo about some shell scripts that I've put together, mainly which help me in my when developing Silver Stripe websites. So hopefully there's some things in here which could help you too. Let me make that a bit bigger for you. I've used this opportunity to make these scripts available. So they're on GitHub, if you go to github.com/purplespider, and I've pinned it at the top here. So we'll jump straight in with a scenario that, as Silver Stripe developers, you've probably, hopefully all experienced, where you've got a live website and you've got your local development version of the site, but you want to update your local development version of the site with the content from the live version, because it's been a while maybe since you've worked on the site. And so there's a few ways you could currently do that. You could just do it manually. You have to somehow download a dump of the database, export it into your local database, and then grab all the assets from the live one and copy those across. Many of you have probably used SSPack, which is really great. If you've not come across it, it's an official Silver Stripe script that allows you to point it at any Silver Stripe site, whether it's remote or local, and it will create a single SSPack file that includes a copy of the database and all the assets, and then you can load that into a different version of the site, say your local version. So SSPack is good, but there's a few downsides. For example, you need to do it in a few different steps. First of all, you need to save the remote version into a file, and then you need to run the load command to load it into your local copy. Also, you have to enter in the SSH details as attributes. So if you're doing it multiple times for a site, you're either doing a lot of typing or copy and pasting. But mostly, one of the bigger downsides, especially when you're working on sites that have a lot of assets, if you've got a few gigs of assets up there, is that every time you run SSPack, it creates basically a zip file of all the assets and downloads that whole zip file, even if just one image had changed, for example. And so that was partly what made me seek an alternative solution. So let me demo that for you, if my hotspot is going to hold up. So let's have a look at this website here. This is the live version of the site, live@schoolforceos.com. And here we have got my local development version. And as you can see, we've got some placeholder images still and an old version of the text. So I want to update this, this local test version to reflect the content on the live website. So I've created this script called SS Download. I'm no good at naming things, so if you've got any cleverer names that could work, do give me a shout. I'll show you the script in action, and then I'll let you know how it works. But literally, all I need to do is open up the project in your editor, and from the root of the site, simply run SS Download. And what will happen if the hotspot is going to work? Come on, you work, just put, there we go. So it's going to ask for my SSH key. And what this script does is it's going to download only, come on, you can do it. it was much faster than I tried it this morning. So you can see it's removing some of those placeholder images because they don't exist anymore on the live site, and it's downloading the new images that had been uploaded, and it's only doing that. It's only making doing the changes between the two sites. And then what it will do is it will download the database from the live site and load that into the new site. This is running a lot slower than it did this morning. Should be getting there. There we go. Now it's working on the database. And the way it does that, while it's finishing off, you'll notice I didn't give it any SSH details or anything. I literally just entered SS download. And that's because in the root of my sites, I've added this ssdownload.conf file, which has the SSH details there. This is actually a local alias that I'm using on my machine, but you would just put in your IP address of your remote server or the host name. And then as long as you've got valid SSH keys, the script will automatically connect to these details and download all the data in what would have been a few seconds, but that's been over a minute on my hotspot. And hopefully, just like that, by running a single command, we can now go back to our development site, refresh it, and voila, we have got it identical to the live site. More impressive when it runs faster. Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi here seems to block SSH connections, which is obviously essential for this. So, yeah, you can see why I created it. Really quickly, you can just run it, and it only downloads the changes. It's really effective on sites that have a lot of assets, and you're only changing a few assets, so you can get going. So to move on to the next one, I should initially explain that I use Laravel Valet as my local development environment. If you've not come across it, basically it installs Nginx and PHP and a few other bits and pieces natively locally on your machine and makes it really easy to link up virtual host names to folders on your machine to run websites. I like it because it's really fast and pretty straightforward to use. To give you a very, very quick demo of anyone that's not seen it, let's make that big. If I simply make a new directory, let's call it Stripecon EU, my demo from earlier. Let's cd into that, and let's go ahead and just very quickly create a index.php file in there if I've done all this right. So now we've just got literally a directory with an index.php file in it. And so to set that up in Valet, all we need to do is type in Valet link. And what that does, it goes ahead and it creates the virtual host automatically based on the directory name. So if I now jump over to my browser and type in stripecon EU.test, and there we go. We've got our hello. So that's Valet in a nutshell. The reason I show you that is because these scripts that I'm about to show you use Valet because they're setting up sites. If you don't, I'm sure you could modify them for your own environment. So let's go ahead and show you the new site script. So often I find myself wanting to set up quickly set up a new Silverstripe site, maybe to test a module that I found or to check if a bug's been fixed in the latest version. And there's a few hoops you have to go through every time you do that, setting it up in Valet in the database and running Composer. So that's why I created this new one, this new script called new site. So you simply run it on the command line. You see all that okay? Ask you what you want the site to be called. This is used for the directory and the database and the URL. So let's call this, I'm just going to be very original again as I'm not used to, not good at naming things, and call it JC test. Then says, which version of Silverstripe would you like? This is basically the version from for the Composer install command. So I'm just going to hit enter to install the latest. And just like that, what this script will do is it will create a new directory, it will link it up to Laravel Valet, it will set up a database on my local database, it will run Composer to install Silverstripe, then it's going to do a dev build, then it's going to set up an SSL certificate using Valet, which automatically restarts, and here we have, just like that, in one command, a fresh Silverstripe site, opened up not only in the browser, but also in your editor of choice, all ready to jump in and do whatever you were looking to do. So you can see if I even do that, I'm not making it up, that is actually operational. And if I actually jump over to the CMS, and this is a good example, you can see how quick Valley is as a local development, just clicking around in Silverstripe. It's really fast. So I use that for, as I said, quickly spinning up Silverstripe sites to check try modules, do checks, check bugs. And so quite often I just want to get rid of that when I'm done. So bring in the next script, and it's simply delete site. And what did I call it again? JC test. So running that unlinks it from Valley, deletes the database, deletes the directory, and now it has completely and utterly gone. So our final scenario, I'm going to use this pest control website as for the example. So this is currently live, premierenvironmentalservices.co.uk. Now, I normally do my development work on my desktop computer at home. So that means that when I'm out and about, I don't necessarily have all my websites ready to edit on my laptop here. So if I was to get a request in from a client to update their website, and that website didn't exist on here, it's always a bit daunting going through that whole, right, let's get it set up locally, let's download the repo, and let's install the database. So, as you can probably guess, I created a script to do that for me. And so, what we will do, this website currently does not exist in any form on this machine. So, I'm literally going to go ahead and clone the repo down from GitHub in my Git client. Obviously, you can do this on the command line if you want. And come on, hotspot. There we go. So let's open that up. Pop it into VS Code. What's happening here? There we go. Right, so here we've got the bare bones of the site. So from here, you would normally have to run composer install and do the database and download the assets and the site. Instead, what we're going to do is open up a terminal and run the command setup site. So this time, again, it asks us what you want it to be called, but you can see it has already picked up the name because it's already looked in the SS download config file, which I showed you before. So I can just hit enter. It's going to ask you to confirm what Silverstripe site it is, and what version of PHP the site uses. But then it's just going to go ahead and do everything. So it will set up the site in Valet. It is creating the env file for you. It is running the SS download script that I showed you before to download all the content off the live site. And eventually, we should have the site. But while that's being very slow, let me actually just show you the scripts here. So I've heavily documented all the scripts, so you can have a look, see what the requirements are. If we jump into the setup site script, for example, a lot of the items are configurable, so you can actually specify what the commands are required for your specific connection to your database. You can set up your own config file which the scripts will use. You can tell it where you want your sites to be in the default PHP versions, even your default admin username and password that are used when you create a new site. This is being particularly slow. So I did these scripts have been developed mainly. They're Mac-based. I think with Laravel Valet, there is a kind of Windows port. I don't know much about it and how well it actually works. The SS download script doesn't rely on Valet. You can that should pretty much work with any Silverstripe site as long as you've got an SSH connection to it. You should be able to easily get that working yourself. This is annoying. I had 5G earlier. I don't know where that's gone. All right, I'm not going to make you watch through the rest of all those files downloading. But you can take my word for it that once that's eventually finished, literally that's all that's required to get up a website, a Silverstripe site up and running on your local machine in two easy steps. Download the repo, run setup site, and that's it. Oh, we're getting there. It's doing the database. All right, ready for the grand finale. Come on, you can do it. So it uses, I don't think I actually mentioned, the SS download script uses rsync to download only the changed assets. It still then uses the SS pack script to download the database. Because one of the advantages of SS pack is that you're not having to give it any of the database details, it just looks them up in the environment file. And so it's rsync and SSPack that it uses to be able to do that much more efficiently than downloading the whole lot. And there we go, we've got our environmental services.test running locally, finally. Thank you.
Awesome. Really cool. We have a little bit short of time, so what we're going to do is going to have one question, maximum.
You feature requests already when we found on larger sites for corporate clients, and you might want to think about anonymizing the database when you download it. And some variable about
Feature request, atomizing the
Interesting.
database.
Well, PRs are open.
Yeah.
Great. All right, thank you, James.
No worries, thank you.
All right, moving on with Julian, with new fantastic lightning talk, and we'll be a little late to lunch, but I think it will be okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, here we go. Okay.
All right, here we go. So I wanted to talk about form field mini apps with the JavaScript framework, lib, or style of your choice. But before we will do that, I wanted to say there was actually some kind of foreshadowing for the Stripecon here in Sweden, because for those of you who attended Virtual Stripecon in 2020 may remember I really loved the polls. And one of the polls was the question where we should host the next on-site Stripecon, and Sweden was already in place too, while we are still waiting for Aaron to take us to the Canary Islands. And yeah, we started making some advertising for the conference, and now we're here, right? So yeah, and not only that, we're having the first hybrid conference here, and that was also the most wanted option from the polls. So thanks Herbert and team for hearing the call of the community. So that's really cool. Great job you're doing. And yeah, I really love the polls. And well, by looking at Maxine's slides earlier, I now think he's wearing it all the time. Okay, so now I'm done camouflaging my lack of preparation with funny slides. Let's get to it. Silverstripe form fields. So we're all using them, we all know them. There's good documentation. We have basic fields, advanced fields, formatted input, relation fields, stuff like composite fields, util fields. A lot of stuff is going on there. Well, some of us might already have created their own form fields, and it works pretty well, but it's lacking like extensive functionality customization options on the front-end side. And we already heard a lot of about jQuery Endwine today, and I think nobody really is a big fan out of it. And well, I'm just not a React person, so even that shift to React on the backend didn't bring big benefits to me. So, and this is one of the reasons why we started looking into this topic. One more brief shout out to the talk from Sourfish at Stripecon EU 2017. It was already about customizing form fields. He came up with like a cool field with extra functionality, so you definitely should check that out. To give you a little context, what brought us to that topic, let's recap a short case study. I think that project is also on the S2 Hub website as a showcase. Client is called Colors Effects, is a company formerly owned by BASF, big German chemical company, and was acquired by some chemical DIC. So we've built like a huge software stack for them. I don't want to go into the whole architecture because it's really architecture monster. So we have like multiple layers and a lot of services. Silverstripe is in there somewhere. You can see it here. And one of the challenges were about document management, because there's a document service, it's a Node.js application, and it's working with the files on AWS S3, but we cannot use the fly system, so the asset abstraction won't work for us in that case, because we have data incoming not only from the backend, but also from third parties over API, and there was like metadata mounted to the upload objects and all of that stuff, so it was clear, okay, we cannot do that with current Silverstripe onboard stuff. But the requirement from our customer was, okay, we want to have everything in one backend, in this Silverstripe backend. Don't bring us a second like mini application outside of Silverstripe where we should maintain the whole documents. We want everything in the backend. And that was basically the challenge. So we came up with that like JavaScript mini app wrapped in a form field, because that brought us everything we wanted. We can use them in Silverstripe edit forms and reuse them not only in one place. We have the full flexibility when talking to asynchronous APIs and the like. And Jackson said already today that flexibility, customizability, and scalability are still like key concepts for Silverstripe. So I think that matches the philosophy a little bit. Also cool is that you can hydrate your JavaScript mini app with like backend data, user ID, API keys, and so on. Then you don't want to put like in the source of the JavaScript application. And for us, the most important part, you're not forced to use jQuery Endwine or React at all. And well, when I was working on the talk, I thought I'd just show you the module that we built, but it's well, it's a huge thingy. It looks like an extensive grid field, and there's a lot of domain-specific logic in there. So may the demo gods be with me, because I created a little showcase yesterday in the hotel lobby, and yeah, and I will try to run you through it. Let's get Docker up and running. Just checking that it works. Yes, it does. Okay, what are we actually doing here? Here you can see it's loading, and then you will see like a collection of GIFs pulled in from an API, and that's a view application here. So pure JavaScript logic, and I'm mounting this as a form field. And yeah, it's of course an odd example, but let me show you some of the sources, how we built that. What is the concept behind it? So first thing, pretty obvious, just create some form field. You can just extend from form field, just you know, put some configuration there, and the main thing is you have to require the sources of your JavaScript mini application. I've just called it GIF field because we're pulling in those GIFs from an API. And just for the sake of demoing the hydration part, there's like this API key from Tenor, this is the GIF provider, and of course it would be better to have that in an environment variable or the like, but just for demoing. So we have that file, and we have 2 template files, accompanying template files. So one is named like the class GIF field with the Silverstripe extension, and one important thing is that you have to come up with a class naming strategy, because that's like the identifier you will need in your JavaScript application. Then the ID generated by the grid field class, and this is the soft hydration part. So we're having a data property, and it's called API key, and this is like grabbing the data from this getter here. Second template is just the holder around it, because we don't want to have like the title or the label of the field on the left. So it's pretty much the same what literal field is doing, but I'm just using these 2 templates for the demo. So now the JavaScript part. I've created a client folder at the root level of application. I think that's the naming convention on the website, and you don't have to use Vue. You can use React, you can use Angular, you can use Svelte or just vanilla JS. But to provide a little more extensive example, I went for a very lean Vue application created with Vite. Some of you might have heard about it. That's the new Webpack alternative everybody pretty much is talking about right now. And just a very, very small Vue component, doesn't do much. It expects a property and API key. I don't want to go into the Vue specifics, but as you can see, I'm using the standard fetch API to fetch this Tenor API with the API key, and then with set timeout, I'm going through the GIFs and I'm loading them. And yeah, then it's up to you how to bundle it. I'm bundling it to the dist folder, and this is where I require them in my PHP class. And the only thing you need to do is to mount it to the selector of the class you applied in the template. So that's pretty much it. But there was one problem we experienced. It's working if you're initially loading the page when the DOM element is already there. So when the entry point is somewhere else here, and if I go then to the page, it isn't showing up. So that was oh boy, how is this going to work? And the solution is pretty straightforward. We're using a mutation observer that's just a JavaScript thingy. I will put that on GitHub, on Gist. I won't explain that too much. That is basically just watching your whole DOM for a specific identifier to pop up during usage. Those of you who used jQuery back in the days may remember that on listener, and it's doing pretty much the same. So always watching the DOM, looking for the element you're specifying, and then executing some callback logic. And yeah, this is that watch element method, and we are wrapping this, rebuilding, and then it should work. Build. Let's try this again. So I'm starting here, going to my page, and you see it's loading, and now we're there. And actually, that's basically it. And the thing is, if you look to the DevTools, that's a whole application, whole JavaScript application living in that one form field. It's not a problem to have multiple root applications for each and every form field. And I have to say that helped us a lot for a lot of projects. So you can mount really big applications even in there. We have something like streaming documents from a Firestore collection and providing then interaction with the data coming from the Silverstripe database. So a lot of use cases are possible with that approach. And yeah, the recipe is also pretty straightforward. So you have to create your front-end app in the way you want, create the PHP clause as a descendant of form field, require your front-end app bundles, create the templates that you need, use mutation observer in your mini app if your mini app needs to be mounted to DOM elements. You might have a mini application that is not like coupled to DOM elements that can like show up over time, then you don't need it, so that's an optional step. And yeah, I know this isn't an easy takeaway, so I will like create a GitHub repo demoing everything. Already started yesterday, but it's not finished yet. But I swear to still provide that, and that's already it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Good stuff. All right, one question. The question. Lars.
Very creative solution. Thanks for that. I was just wondering, what do you think about Vite? Should we step over from Webpack? Has nothing to do with your module.
I personally really like it because it's super fast and you don't have that like huge config overhead. So it brings a lot of stuff out of the box, and you don't have like to care for like extra dependencies pulling in if you want to compile SAS or less or files with a Vue extension. It does everything out of the box, and that is really, really convenient, because my pain with Webpack already was that I just wanted it to get the job done and not to learn Webpack and all the configuration options, and it started to annoy and confuse me. And I don't have that with Vite.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so we have some lunch now, and we'll be back 1:30 here with the next talk. And lunch is just down the stairs. And yeah, you'll be served. Thank you.